All right, today we're going to dive into some more issues about coaching and mentoring. And chapter 7 of the textbook really kind of supports the work of this lecture. We're going to explore some differences and some contradictions between both the ideas of mentorship and then leadership. Can you do both? Should you do both? And how do you communicate to others those types of differences? And then we're really going to jump into some considerations when we're doing mentorship. The basic idea of being a mentor is that you are an adult who has the ability to provide guidance and teaching to somebody else. So you can provide an example, and you can also provide that knowledge to a protege or a mentee. It is intended to increase their ability and their capacity in a professional sense. So for the purposes of this class, for our teaching ability. And it is also designed to increase our effectiveness of a teacher. So if they have better effectiveness in a classroom in order to handle the issues that might arise. I love this quote though. Leadership is not taught and leadership is not learned. Leadership is learning. And that's from our textbook as well. I love the kind of idea that it's a lifelong process. It's part of just our development as humans and professionally as well, that we're always constantly learning about our staff, we're learning about others, we're learning new management techniques, and we're putting that all into practice when we're supporting our staff. I think if we were face-to-face, that we would have some time to engage in this idea of, can you mentor staff and also be a leader manager? So can you write policies, hire and fire people, be concerned about budgets, and then also mentor staff? Can you do both? Can you communicate the differences between them? Can you support everybody? If you can't do all of those things, who else can? So a lot of times we realize that we need support with our budgets. We get accountants and we get people who can help us make financial decisions, or we have departments if we're large enough, based on the idea that we might not be able to handle all of the budgeting concerns, especially if we're getting state, federal grant monies and we're nonprofits. So we understand that, but so maybe if it's mentoring, can you provide a lot of support and reflective supervision, but you can't mentor your staff. It's just too difficult with the amount of people or the type of people, or that you're so much of a program director that you're very much involved in hiring and firing. And so mentoring people and then also hiring and firing and writing our policies about job functions and job descriptions might be really problematic for you. So I think that you would need to know how and when you can be a mentor, and maybe reasons that you can and cannot do it as well. I do want to jump a little bit into some considerations of mentorship, because I think this also brings up the ideas of what can you do and what can't you do. So when we're looking at some considerations, a lot of it's time, money, access to resources, actual space, and then fit with people as well. So looking at if you can mentor other people, and this is going to be a lot about mentorship considerations. Also keep in mind, can I bridge these considerations? Can I not bridge them? Is this part of my program, not part of my program? And what are other ways that I can engage in mentorship? So time, time is a huge issue in anything, but especially if we're being reflective or we're engaging in supportive mentorship with people, you need time to mentor teachers. You need time to observe them. You need time to model for them. You need time to talk to them about their teaching practice. We do have some slow times. We have nap times, we have recess, we have lunch, we have non-instructional time, we have in-services. Non-instructional time and in-services would be for the whole group. So ways that you might want to change, talking about how your communication policies are going to change, or what reflective supervision is just in general. If you are going to make smaller decisions with people, yeah, nap time might be good, but it's a very individual process. You also need to be aware of the fact that you might have to set a time for private one-on-one. So if you're really helping people engage together or to change who they are, or if they need a lot of social emotional support, that needs to be fairly private. You're not going to want to have another coworker or colleague part of that. That's not going to be a supportive situation for that employee. So same with recesses and lunches as well. Yeah, they might be out of the classroom on lunch, but that's their time. They're not being paid. They need to reflect and chill out and have some time away from kids and be an employee so that they can go back refreshed go back into that infant room to work with babies or whatever it is that they do. So you can't take away their lunch break either to engage in this. Recess can be problematic as well. You don't want to take away from their supervisory work that they are doing with children. They have to be watching their ratios and knowing supervision, so you might not have that time either. If you take them outside of teaching time as well, you're most likely going to have to pay people. So you're going to have to get a substitute or a float to take them out of their classroom. And so that is a budgetary concern for you. So that's adding to your budget overall, and you need to track that as well. A good thing would be, I have $500 each quarter, so every 3 months, that I can put into staffing for reflective supervision. So that's a certain amount of floats or substitute teachers that you can get in to relieve your staff out of the classroom so that you can have conversations with them. You also have to understand that you, as a director, are now making a time commitment as well. This is taking away from your running of programs. You're talking to families, you're answering emails, you're being part of the community, you're going to meetings. You have a lot of things that you have to do every day. And this also will take time out of your day in order to engage in, and you need to budget for that as well. You can't do unlimited employee support throughout the day, because you also have to, make plans to fix a leaky roof and go to a board meeting and plan for the budget for next month and go to the print shop to get your handbooks made. Like, you're going to have a lot to do. You need to also be aware of what's the time commitment when I'm trying to support people. Money is always a big one. I've talked a little bit about that. So it's a cost in your annual budget. So maybe you can forecast down here like $1,000 in regular substitute costs for an out-of-class supervision and mentorship. So when you're forecasting at the beginning of the year, you typically have an annual budget where you look at each month, like January, my liability is due, August, my insurance is up, and then you could also say, spread over 12 months, I have $1,000. What does that look like? Or what months can I have more time or less time to engage in supervision? And I'm going to budget this much money to hire substitutes so that we can pull staff out of classrooms and help them work through some reflective supervision. It also needs to be a cost of materials. So most likely, if this is new, or if you're going above and beyond, you need to give them handouts. You need to offer them time to read the materials. You might buy entire books. If you're changing curriculum to make a supportive change, that the decision-making process was staff wanted to change curriculum, you now have to change your curriculum. So there's a lot of material costs that go in with this as well. We also have some considerations with access and just kind of access to resources. We all have staff, and we all have the same relationship with those kinds of staff as well. So we know that everybody is different and that they're prioritizing, but you're also kind of a mentor or a supervisor in the same capacity with each people if they're of the same pay grade. So how can you kind of divide responsibilities of leadership, of mentorship, and management among staff and teachers? So can you set up a system of mentor teachers who get to come out of the classroom, who have been taught and supported and trained in being reflectively supportive and mentoring of others? They might have a better grasp on the children, the families, the classrooms, and then the mentorship that they are kind of engaging in can be really supportive for your staff, and that takes a little bit of the burden off of you. Mentor teachers can be from the same program, from the same age group of the program, from a different program, or even from outside of the organization. Mentor teachers can be in a lot of different characteristics. If you search mentor teachers online, a lot of information pops up and a lot of networks and resources for this as well. So that's one way that not everybody can have access to you all of the time. So if you have, in some situations, I've had 80 employees. That's a tremendous amount of people. I had to delegate, and I had 4 mentor teachers. So each age group that we worked with had a mentor teacher that had been trained and supported so that they could support the staff with some minimal issues and problems. So she did a lot of the lesson planning support. She did a lot of work with challenging behaviors, and she did a lot of the emotional support as well. In that situation, because she was a mentor teacher, she also had a different pay grade as well. So she got extra money for engaging in this process, and she also got he got time out of the program as well. So it was additionally like 3 to 4 hours, sometimes even 5, so an hour a day, depending on our subs, of time that they were relieved from their duties, were paid for it, and could go around mentoring other people. So that's a way that you can do it. You are still the manager, supervisor. You still have to do all of the work that engages in it, but you can also identify people who can help you with access and those resources and evenly distributing it so that people feel more supported. Space. So where do you actually going to do this? I know a lot of our programs are super small. We don't have a lot of private areas. So where can you perform the actual work of one-on-one work? Because a lot of this reflective supervision, mentorship, and coaching needs to be one-on-one. So is there a private area where others will not hear the conversation? So not in the cafeteria, or not in the foyer, not in a classroom at nap time, maybe in your office. A lot of times people don't like offices. They think of, especially their boss's office, as I'm going to get fired, or I've done something wrong, or they have a reaction as soon as they go in. It's not a pleasant place for them. So is there a picnic table outside that's really private and nobody's going to hear you, but you're outside, it's more relaxing. They feel like they can open up and discuss issues with you. We want the person who supervises to be familiar with the constraints and be able to offer reflective support as well. So maybe this is a mentor teacher, maybe this is an assistant director, a site supervisor from a different program. What are ways that you can set up and support the mentoring relationship? And then also ways that you can get into the classroom as well, because you need to be familiar with the classroom, the children, and the staff in order to kind of help them make sense. So, you know, I had a program where we had 350 children on Camp Pendleton. So we actually kind of divided the program into two. We each, so of those 80 staff that I was talking about a couple of slides ago, we kind of divided them into 40. And then we had our mentor teachers, and then we had us. I knew all of my 80 staff members, and she knew all 82. We did try to kind of divide, like, hey, come to this person when at all possible, because you're going to have a better chance at a one-on-one relationship this way. And then with 350 students, there's a lot of being in the classroom, seeing them, generally getting to know their faces, even if I didn't always know their names. I knew most of the children's names, but not always. And then also, you know, identifying children that were going to need a little bit of extra support, or families that were more challenging. So I always knew what was going on with my programs, but I also had to make some changes in how I supervised 350 children, multiple programs, full day, part day, infant, toddler, after school, summer camps. I mean, that's a tremendously large program with a large budget as well. So we also were able to make some space as well. So we had a training office that had a lot of books and conference tables and one-on-one space. And that was fantastic because it wasn't like your boss's office, but it also kind of allowed us to set up a space that felt welcoming and supported reflections. There were computers and big tables and soft chairs and places where you maybe, if you had time, you could sit down and you could relax and you could start writing some ideas for lesson planning, or do a webinar with me about challenging behaviors. So we did have some extra resources that we were able to put towards the actual physical space of allowing people to engage in reflection. And then fit, this is not the best, I'm realizing now, this is not the best looking slide that I've ever made, so I'm gonna read it to you. It's not very high contrast, so I apologize. There are cultural, linguistic, racial, ethnic considerations to think of when engaging in reflection and mentorship with another person. What language might this person need to be supported in? And different cultures learn in different ways, and a mentor supervisor should be able to respectfully understand and work within many cultures. So cultural competence, once again, that there are values, beliefs, and attitudes that have to do how we grew up and how we kind of express our identity. So how we allow other people to express that should be very much respectful. And once again, we might have to bridge some differences between our identities and other people's identities. A lot of this also has to do with language as well. We're very, very lucky that most programs in Southern California are Spanish, English bilingual. We also want to make space for other languages that people might be speaking, but also understanding that some people and some of your staff did not grow up speaking English. So they are now having to learn and being an employee in not their first or home language, and supporting that they might need to learn in that language. So a lot of times with some staff that were coming from a different country and we're newer immigrants, allowing or supporting them in learning through their home language. language. I don't speak any other languages. I wish that I did. But like in staff meetings and things like that, if a staff member was struggling, they might turn to somebody who was right next to them who spoke their own language for clarification, and that was fine. When I'm teaching right now, I have people who speak a lot of different languages, and I have a couple employees right now who have come recently from another country, and they sit next to each other, and they ask for clarification. So if I'm talking about something that they're not aware of, I'll write it down on the board so that they can come back and look at it later. At break time, they might ask me a specific question. They might set up times to ask about those things that they are maybe not familiar with, or that they just need clarification in their own home language. So I make space in the classroom. They typically sit in the front, in the middle of the room, so they can see me really well, but also at the back so that they can turn and talk to each other and say, oh, like I'll hear, oh, like once it's kind of been translated in a way, they'll be like, oh yeah, we know that. We just didn't understand the way that you were speaking about it in English in the classroom. But once it got translated into our own language, we kind of figured it out. Most of our programs are bilingual, and that's, we speak in maybe English and Spanish to other people. But I do like to kind of bring up that the language that a person learns in might be a consideration that you might need to be aware of as a supervisor. How can you support somebody being able to communicate with you in the language that you speak, and then also being able to learn in the language that they learn best in? And then I'm going to kind of switch to, what do you or they want to have happen? So what do you want to have happen, and what do they, your employees, also want to have happen? Because those is sometimes a disconnect between supervision and mentoring, with the idea that, how do I want my program to be run? What's my vision? What's my goals? And then how is it run right now? And then what do the employees think? Is our vision in line? Do they have a completely different idea of how they want it to be run? Do they like the status quo? Do they like how it's being run right now? And they're like, we don't want to change. So you have to kind of hit the tension between the two. How can I support you? But what is your ultimate goal? What do you ultimately want for the program? It's definitely a balance, because sometimes you have to make a hard or unpopular decision and stick to them. I remember there was a time we opened, our center was originally open 7 to 4:30, which was great. Everybody worked either a 6:45 to 3:45 or a 7:30 to 4:30 shift, which is quite a nice shift. It's quite early in the morning. You're getting out before 5. It allowed a lot of people to pick up their kids after school. And then we needed to change it. It wasn't meeting the needs of our families anymore. So the families that we had were going through drug and alcohol addiction, and a lot of our families were now getting jobs. But those jobs, they couldn't get off until 5 or 5:30. So we made the decision that we were going to open 1 hour later. This meant that a lot of people's shifts needed to be changed. I needed to change my own shift, which, you know, I loved working 7 to 4. That was fantastic. Actually, I worked 7:15 to 4:15. So I was basically there all hours of operation. And now I was going to have to like get there a little bit later and stay till 5:30, which whenever you're closing, it's always more like 6 o'clock. So I had to make that unpopular decision, and it was a hard decision. People's shifts had to change. And so I had to stick with them, because our center was now going to be open an hour later. Other times you're making decisions to support goals, and you can be more people-centered. So the staff probably wouldn't have chosen to stay open an hour later, and they didn't like their shift change. But in other situations, I could be more people-centered. I actually brought it to them and I said, you know, do you want to kind of do rotating, so that, you know, somebody every Wednesday, so-and-so does the closing, and Tuesday somebody else does it, and Wednesdays? Or do you want a whole week of getting off at 3 and then a whole week of getting off at 5 and then a whole week of, you know? So they actually kind of made a decision based on what was best for the whole group. And it also was really nice too, with like decision making. We had some group collaboration, so that people felt like, oh, you know, this was the week that I was supposed to work till 5:30, but could I switch a day with you so that I can get off early and pick up my kid? And everybody would always be really supportive of that, because we had kind of done it as a group. And then you knew that, you know, that you could get the same from them, or you actually traded a shift or something like that. So there are times when you can be more facilitative, and you can have that balance between making decisions that everybody likes, and then also involving people so that they feel more support. There's also a give and take between the program and the people who work there. So there's a give and take between our goals, what the family needs from us. Do they need more hours? What the children need in the classroom? The funding that I'm receiving, if it's going down, if shutdowns are affecting it, if if income and recessions are affecting the income that I can make, what my board above me might say if I'm governed by a board, what my boss above me might say, what the law says about how I hire or how I fire people. Community care licensing is a huge one. As community care licensing come up with a new regulation that affects how we do a lot of different things. So there's a lot of things in the program that I have my hands tied behind too. If licensing says something, licensing is never going to be reflective. When community care says jump, I say how high, and then I bring my program in to compliance with that, because they are the ones that can keep us. We have some ability to speak with our analyst and have conversations at kind of a larger level, but when it really comes down to a law or regulation, we do have to just kind of comply with it, and that means that our staff have to get in line with it as well. So the people that you work with might not like licensing and their regulations, but we have to work with them in order to keep our license current and to continue to work. So the balance between the people and the program is always going to change and ebb and flow as the needs of the program and the needs of the people change as well. I wish that it always looked like this, like it was such a beautiful, serene picture, but a lot of time balance is out of whack. It's leaning towards people one month and then it's leaning towards the program other, or everything's kind of up in the air as you're trying to figure it out. It's more like juggling and trying to keep balls in the air versus kind of just nice rocks stacked at the beach. I also want to touch on the idea of like servant leadership, because I think that's kind of the ethos that drives the things that I'm talking about. So it's sometimes called facilitative and sometimes it's called servant leadership. It's the idea that the power and resources go for the benefit of the teachers and the families. I'm in a union, so teaching unions, and it's the same type of thing, like working people working towards a goal together. So power and resources that you can pool communally to benefit us, the teachers, and the students that we work for as well. So sometimes you can be really servant oriented, and sometimes you can't. So once again, monies, schedules, family services, confidentiality issues coming up higher from you from boards, management, or licensing, you can't be a servant leadership. Like there's just a power imbalance and this is going to be how it's going to be. Other times we can be. So when we're looking at the needs of our workplace, of our community, instead of pitting teachers against themselves, we can be people-centered and try to achieve our goals together through shared decision-making, through cultural competence, through making time, space, and access a reality so that people feel supported, for setting up mentorship programs. This leadership style is also the most similar to the mentor relationship, in that you reciprocally create it with other people and you're focused more on the benefit of everybody outweighing the benefit of a few. It's not a mentor relationship, so the servant leadership idea or the leadership style is not a mentor relationship, but it is kind of the most similar. It might not be possible for you as a supervisor or employer to be a full mentor. It's just not when we're looking at some of, like, if you're hiring and firing or you're signing people's paychecks, you're not ever going to be a full mentor because of the constraints of the employee-employer power imbalance and the fact that you've hired them. But you can still be a supervisor or employer and engage in servant leadership or facilitative leadership. There are ways that you can do that. You can still use your power and resources to benefit your teachers while still being a supervisor of them. So if somebody is a weak link, they're not supervising children, they're not fulfilling the job functions that they need to do, letting them go and terminating their employment services the community. It services the benefit of all of the teachers to not have somebody who doesn't come to work when they're supposed to, doesn't do the job functions that they're supposed to. So as a supervisor employer, maybe you can't be a full mentor, but you can engage in some of the processes of reflective supervision and facilitative or servant leadership. In conclusion, kind of what is balance to you? Is it a juggle? Is it stacking rocks? How do you keep the goals of the program in alignment with a great workplace for all of your teachers while also supporting children and staff? Those are three very different goals. How do you do that, and how do you support people in those types of balancing equations and issues? And also, how do you prioritize adults and children at the same time? Sometimes what you have to do for the children in your program is not going to be popular with the adults that you supervise in your program, and vice versa. Some of the things that you do to support your adults might also affect how some classroom management happens as well. Like an example would be having subs come into the classroom. That's not always the most consistent care, but if it in the long run is going to get your employees in a better place to supervise, then that would be a great trade-off that we might do in the moment in order to advance our program. So how do we prioritize and balance all of these mentorship and leadership roles that we might have to engage in? I hope that I will see you guys online and we can have more discussions about this. Have a great week, and I'll see you online.